In 1954, the kitchen table was a sanctuary. It wasn't a landing strip for junk mail, half-empty medicine bottles, or those old newspapers that seem to multiply when we aren't looking. Back then, the kitchen held a very different role. It was a space that felt calm, open, and ready for life to happen without resistance. The surprising part is that this didn't happen because our mothers had more discipline or extra time, but because they followed a simple 10-minute rhythm that most of us have completely lost. And once you begin to see it clearly, you start to realize that what feels like clutter today often begins in moments so small we don't even notice them happening. Today, I'm going to show you that rhythm in a way you can actually use, and we're going to walk through it step by step, from what I call the one-touch rule to a simple pantry shift that quietly fixes most of the build-up people struggle with, and even the deeper reason why some things stay in our kitchen long after they've stopped serving us. And before we go any further, I want you to do something with me, because this is where everything actually begins. And once you see it, it becomes very difficult to ignore. Take a moment and look at your kitchen counter exactly as it is right now, not how you wish it looked, but how it truly is in this moment. Because if you see even one item that was set down instead of fully put away, then you've just found the exact starting point of clutter in your home, not as a failure, but as a small, unfinished movement that was never completed. That's the part most people miss. Clutter doesn't begin as something large or overwhelming. It begins in that quiet pause where something is left halfway between where it was used and where it belongs. And once that pause exists, it creates space for other things to gather around it. We tell ourselves we'll do it later, and in the moment that feels harmless, almost responsible, but later isn't neutral, because every time we delay a simple action, we create a small mental note that doesn't disappear. It simply waits. And the more those moments build, the heavier the space begins to feel, without us fully understanding why. In the 1950s, people moved through their kitchens with a kind of quiet completion, not faster and not with more effort, but with a different rhythm, where if something was picked up, that movement didn't stop halfway or pause on a surface. It continued all the way until it was finished, leaving no opening for clutter to settle in. That's what I call the one-touch rule, and once you begin to notice it, you start to see how often we break it without even realizing it, because we've become so used to pausing in the middle of small tasks that it feels normal. I didn't fully understand how much this mattered until I noticed a small pile of mail sitting on my own counter that had been there for days. And although it didn't seem important, every time I walked past it, there was a subtle feeling that something was unfinished, something quietly waiting for my attention. That feeling is what I think of as visual noise. And once it exists in your space, it doesn't just stay there physically. It follows you, sitting in the background of your mind, even when you're not thinking about it directly. And when you begin to finish those small movements fully, something shifts, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way that starts to bring the space back into balance. Now, as you start to see that more clearly, something else begins to stand out, something that sits at the center of the home and reflects this pattern more visibly than almost anywhere else. Think about your kitchen table for a moment, not as an idea, but as it actually is right now, because this is where the difference between intention and reality becomes very clear. The table is meant to be a place of connection, a space where meals are shared and moments are held. But over time, it often becomes something else, a place where things are temporarily placed and then quietly forgotten. A letter rests there, a bag is set down, a cup remains longer than it should, and none of those actions feel like a problem on their own. But together, they begin to change how the space feels, until one day the table no longer invites you to sit, but instead asks you to clear space before you can use it. And over time, you begin to use it less, not because you chose to, but because it no longer feels ready. In the 1950s, a clear table wasn't about keeping things perfect. It was about keeping the home ready, ready for a meal, ready for a conversation, ready for a quiet moment without needing to move things out of the way first. And that readiness came from something very simple, something that took only a few minutes but made a lasting difference. After every meal, there was a brief return to order, where the plates were cleared, the surface was wiped, and the space was reset, not as a chore, but as a way of closing that moment fully so that nothing from it carried forward into the next. And because of that, the table never had the chance to become overwhelmed because each moment was completed before the next one began. Now, there's another place in the kitchen where this rhythm matters just as much, although it often goes unnoticed, and that is the pantry, where clutter doesn't always appear on the surface, but instead builds quietly in the background. If you think about the very back of your pantry shelf, the place your hand doesn't reach very often, you may begin to realize that it holds items you haven't thought about in a long time, things that didn't disappear, but simply moved out of sight as newer items took their place in front. That space is what I like to call the mystery zone, and it exists not because we intend to ignore it, but because the natural flow of the space has been interrupted. In most modern kitchens, when something new comes in, it's placed in front, pushing older items further back, and over time, those items become disconnected from our awareness. But in the 1950s, the movement was reversed in a simple but powerful way, where new items were placed behind what was already there, allowing older items to move forward and be used first, creating a steady, natural flow where nothing has the chance to be forgotten. And I remember very clearly the moment this became real to me, when I reached up to the top shelf of my pantry and found a small container that I had completely lost track of. Something that looked familiar, but felt distant at the same time, with a label that had faded just enough to make me pause and look more closely. And I'll admit, I hesitated for a moment before opening it, because it didn't feel like checking food. It felt like uncovering something that had been quietly sitting there for years, waiting to be noticed again. And in that moment, it became very clear that when the flow stops, things don't disappear. They simply wait. Now, I want to pause for a moment, because there is another part of this that isn't about habits at all, but about something deeper, something many people carry quietly without always speaking about it. The things we keep because they belong to someone we loved. Old cookbooks, Sets of dishes, items that hold memories that feel too important to let go, even if we don't use them in our daily lives. And over time, those items can begin to create a quiet weight, not because they are wrong to keep, but because they no longer fit into the rhythm of how we live now. We start to feel that letting go of the object means letting go of the person, and that feeling can keep things in our space long after they've stopped serving us. But your kitchen isn't meant to be a museum of the past. It's meant to be a living space that supports your life as it is today. And there is a difference between honoring a memory and holding on to something that quietly creates pressure instead of peace. You can take a photo, pass it on to someone who will use it, or simply let it leave your space in a way that feels right to you. Because the memory itself doesn't live in the object, and letting go of something physical doesn't mean you're losing the person. It simply means you're allowing yourself a little more room to breathe in the life you're living now. And when you begin to bring all of these small shifts together, something else begins to change, something that quietly shapes how your entire next day begins. At the end of the night, no matter how the day has gone, the sink is returned to a clear and empty state, not as a chore, but as a way of closing the day fully, so that nothing is left waiting for you in the morning. Because when you walk into your kitchen the next day and find that space already clear, something shifts, not just in how it looks, but in how it feels, as though you are beginning the day without carrying yesterday forward with you. And once you notice that feeling, it becomes something you naturally want to return to, because it changes the way your space supports you. So now, I want you to think about this in your own way. What is one kitchen habit you grew up with that you didn't appreciate at the time, but now realize was quietly keeping everything in order? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next video.